Good morning, TOK. Welcome to class number 4. What do you know? It's a pretty good question, actually. Today's discussion is going to be not only what do you know, but what can you know? Is there anything? That's all. Is there anything? Um, I had originally decided that I was going to call this something like, is there anything that cannot be known? Is there anything that you can know without knowing you know it? I had a number of, we'll generously say, clever ideas. But then I realized as I was staring at my screen, as I was typing things in, is there anything? What can you know if nothing exists? So that begs the question, does anything exist? Is there anything to be known? Most of us start our knowledge journeys with two unshakable assumptions. These are our axioms. These are the two beliefs that all our subsequent knowledge tends to be built upon. The first is that there is a real world, that independent of our thoughts and our perception, our cognition. That's a fancy way of saying our thinking. The independent of us, there is a real world. And the second assumption is that that real world is to some extent knowable, that it can be known, that we can understand some aspects of this real world. Well, it turns out that finding evidence to support this idea that there is a real world can be challenging. Um, all the things that we normally point to in our everyday lives to say that we know something are subject to doubt. And the more closely we examine, the more radical our doubt becomes. How can we know anything if we're not sure anything exists? The primary way that we interact with reality is through our perception, our senses. Now, our senses are interpreted by our minds, but we rely on them heavily. I'll believe it when I see it is a common expression. But we all know our senses can deceive us. How many of you have ever sworn that you heard something or saw something and then it turned out it just wasn't so? That you misheard or misunderstood? How about this? What about hallucinations, distractions, and illusions? It's possible to trick your senses. Here's an example. This is a fairly common bar diagram. It's a two-dimensional representation of three-dimensional bars laid out in a row. How many are there? I'll give you a moment. I'd like to point out at this point that because we're talking about sense perception, illusion, and confused senses, most of you will have looked at this diagram much more closely than you would under normal circumstances. That's okay. If, like most people, you counted the diamond-shaped ends of the bars that represent the isolinear projection of the square ends of the bars, you would have counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 bars. But you know that I'm trying to trick you, that there's something going on here. So you may have looked at the opposite end, the hidden end, not visible from this point of view. You may have started at the center top and down towards center right, counting the ends of the bars and found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So are there 8 bars or are there 7? Well, of course, the obvious answer is neither. If you look at the first 5 bars starting from the left, and you carefully trace each one of those is a standard two-dimensional representation of a 3D bar. They are drawn correctly. If you look at the rightmost bar, the one that begins at the center and heads towards the center right, that is the next bar, the sixth bar. What about the things in the middle? Well, between bars 1 through 5 and bar number 6, there is a series of unconnected lines that form an optical illusion.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Apparently Siri wanted to navigate this as well. Well, she doesn't get to do that. So in this diagram, there are 6 bars. I'm sure you all got that, right? So let's go back to our senses. Our senses can be confused, they can be lied to. Even when they're working, they're subject to something called perception filters. And the idea behind a perception filter is that our senses capture far more data than our brains can process. Even our subconscious can't process all the information coming in. Much of the data that comes in through our senses washes over our brains and disappears. It's not buffered, it's not saved, we can't remember it later. We just don't add it to our storage. I'll tell you what, we're going to do a little experiment. I'm going to demonstrate a perception filter. If you're not already sitting this way, I want you to sit or stand so that both feet are on the floor. There is a built-in assumption there that you have 2 feet. If you have more or less than 2 feet, assume when I say your right foot that I'm meaning whichever foot you consider to be the right one, if any. So I want you to think about your right foot. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to concentrate. No, seriously, really close your eyes. It's okay, everybody else is supposed to be doing this too, so they're not watching you. Okay, they might be watching you. Some of your classmates are a little weird. But trust me on this one. Close your eyes and focus your attention only on your right foot. Specifically, where your heel and your big toe touch the floor. Now, they're probably inside of shoes, possibly inside of socks, possibly inside of stockings. I don't know your life. But the idea here is that you are making contact with the floor with your right foot. You can feel the pressure. You can feel the normal force pushing up against you. That's the reaction to the force of gravity pulling you and the earth towards one another that results in a downward pressure of your foot onto the floor. You might be able to feel your toes pressed together inside your shoe, or if you wiggle your toes, you might feel them rubbing up against one another or against your sock or against a portion of your shoe. You might feel warm, you might feel cool. Okay, open your eyes. Yeah, most of you already had your eyes open. It's okay, I'm not there to check it, and I wouldn't fail you for this anyway. The idea is that you now have an awareness of your right foot and all of the physical sensations coming into it that 2 minutes ago did not exist. That data is now fresh in your mind. And once we stop drawing attention to it, you'll pretty much forget about it. You might remember this lesson and have your attention momentarily distracted and brought down to your right foot. But there's no way you could live your life constantly. Sorry about that. Had to clear my throat rather calamitously. There's no way you could live your life constantly aware of your right foot or any other physical sensation. We filter that out with what's called our perception filters. It's very much like you don't normally pay attention to your breathing. If you want, you can breathe in, hold it, and breathe out. And you'll be very aware of your breath at that point. And 5 minutes from now, none of you will be thinking about your breathing. It's just going to happen. Your brain does housekeeping on minor chores. The idea here is that our senses cannot be trusted as the sole source of input in regards to the quote, real world. So let's look at some other ways of knowing. We know we can't trust our senses. What about language? I'm going to give you a piece of knowledge through the means of language. My cat's name is Snowball. Visualize, imagine that cat. Everybody got that cat in their head? Well, yeah, that's a lie. My cat's name isn't Snowball. My cat's name is Taco Cat. That's him there. If you spell his name backwards, it's Taco Cat. The idea here is that we can't trust language. All of us know that people lie. Sometimes people are wrong. They're not intentionally lying, but the information they give you isn't correct. Although we do gain information through language, it is not a reliable indicator of the nature of reality. Well, what about some of the other ways of knowing? Faith, intuition, emotion. Emotion's a good one. The problem with these ways of knowing is that they tell us a lot more about ourselves than they do about the world. I can have all the emotional satisfaction of being proud of my heritage, and believe that that gives me certain insights into the world. But that could be completely bogus. Other people with different heritages and different insights will have very different ideas about the world. Intuition, that's just a fancy name for subconsciously assembling incomplete data in the attempt to make accurate conclusions. We can't count on faith, emotion, or intuition. They are ways of knowing, but they're not good as the sole way to understand existence. Now, philosophers and Vulcans like to rely upon reason, that some things can be understood by thinking about them rigorously. And I am a huge fan of rigorous thought. But reason has its downfalls as well. It can be prone to errors of fact. You can make good calculations based on bad data and get bad results. But you can also have errors of logic themselves, like fallacies, paradoxes, faulty syllogisms. A syllogism is where you say that all members of one group belong to a second group, and that a specific member belongs to the first group, therefore he belongs to the second group. Imagine it this way. Taco Cat is a American Shorthair. All American Shorthairs are cats. Therefore, Taco Cat is a cat. A faulty syllogism is where you have the relationship wrong. Siamese are cats. All Siamese are cats. Taco Cat is a cat. Therefore, Taco Cat is a Siamese. Well, no, he's not. He's a cat. In this case, an American Shorthair. The most vicious reason problem is something called a paradox. Paradoxes are where you have a series of individually understandable logical statements that, when assembled, form illogical conclusions. Not wrong conclusions. This isn't a case where you just make a mistake. This is where you get yourself into a situation where logic itself breaks down. Reason takes a holiday, and you are left with what's called a paradox. Consider the sentence in the black box. This sentence is a lie. Well, if the sentence is true, and that sentence is a lie, that means that the sentence is a lie. But I just said it was true. Okay, so the sentence is a lie. Then it's just what it says it is. And if it's just what it says it is, it's true. If the sentence is a lie, then it's true. But if it's true, then it must be a lie. There is no way to resolve this reasonably. This is a very simple paradox. I'm going to do a little bit more colorful one here. I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations, and I'm also going to ask you to avoid shouting out the less mature thoughts that may be springing into your young minds. I want you to think for a moment about bikini waxes. If you don't know what this is, I would suggest sometime outside of class, look it up. Make sure you have your safe search on. And if your parents or guardians ask me why I had you searching for bikini waxes online, I'm going to look them right in the eye and say, I don't know you. Here's the idea behind what's called the barber's paradox. Imagine a person. We'll call him Phil. Phil is the barber, beautician, cosmetologist, waxing specialist, eyebrow threader. He is the beauty specialist for an entire town. Phil provides bikini waxes for everybody in town, except for the people who do their own bikini waxes. This seems like an entirely logical, reasonable statement. He waxes everyone who doesn't wax themselves. So far, so good. But Phil lives in the town. Who gives Phil his bikini wax? Well, based on our earlier statement, he waxes everyone who doesn't wax themselves. So if he doesn't wax himself, then he waxes himself. But if he waxes himself, then he can't wax himself because he waxes everyone who doesn't wax themselves. You see where we're going here? There is no possible solution where Phil can both live in the town and provide bikini waxes for everyone who does not provide their own bikini wax. It is a paradox, an unresolvable problem. Okay, so we can't trust reason, we can't trust our senses, we can't trust anything. This brings me to what I like to call the pickle jar problem. Imagine two scenarios. Half of y'all are students. You are in a classroom, you are watching this video, you are participating in your theory of knowledge course. The other half of you were in a terrible boating accident, and the only thing we could save was your brains. All of your body's gone. So what we've done is we took your brain and we put it in a pickle jar, a great big pickle jar, and we filled it with a life-sustaining fluid, perhaps fluid X, that we explored in the yoga video last time. We've got the pickle jar filled with fluid X and your brain's in there. And we have a series of electrodes that have been carefully inserted, providing electrical stimulation that exactly mimics your physical senses. As far as you can tell, you are exactly the same world, the exact same class. You're looking at the same things. You're feeling the same things. You felt your toe when we did the right foot exercise. But it was all a lie. You are a brain in a pickle jar. You may recognize this from the film The Matrix, 20 years old now, but still one of the better explorations in American cinema on what is reality. And we're going to share a little video clip where one of the human beings is inside the Matrix, inside the simulation, and he's being offered a better virtual life in exchange for betraying humanity. Let's watch.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Reagan?
You know, I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
So, our intrepid pilgrim could be real, could be a brain in a pickle jar. His argument is, since you can't tell one from the other, does it matter? Okay, heavy deal. Let's move on to something a little more easily digestible. French philosophy. I'm sure you guys know René Descartes, right? No? Yes? René Descartes? He's a French philosopher and a mathematician, invented graphing, basically, coordinate geometry. He was really sick and he was lying in bed and he was watching a fly wander across the ceiling. And being both a mathematician and a philosopher and also French, he decided that there is nowhere on his ceiling the fly could go that his position could not be described by a vertical or y-axis and a horizontal or x-axis coordinate. He invented graphing. So René Descartes, picture here, yeah, he looks French. He came up with one of the fundamental questions of philosophy. He is sometimes considered the father of modern philosophy. And he was making an argument against solipsism. Solipsism is the idea that everything that we know of the world, or perhaps the world itself, exists inside our experience. You could think of it as a Venn diagram that looks something like this here on the left. That we understand the self, and everything we understand of the world is inside ourselves. The argument for solipsism goes something like this. I know I'm real, I don't know about you, and I have big doubts about everything else. Which leads to the old joke. Is it solipsist in here, or is it just me? Okay, tough room. But this led to a question. If we can't know anything about the world for certain, because we never know for sure if we're out in the world or if we're a brain in a pickle jar, what can we know? And Descartes came up with something called the cogito. I like to call it Descartes' assertion. An assertion is something you put forward as a fact or to be considered as knowledge. And it represents the one thing you can know. It goes something like this. How do I know that I exist? Well, I don't know anything about the world for the reasons we've talked about earlier. I may have opinions, I may have suspicions, but I don't have undeniable knowledge. In fact, the only thing I can know for certain is that I exist. And the reason for that is pretty simple. We know that we exist because we can observe the action of questioning our existence. Cogito ergo sum, in Latin, means I think, therefore I am. The one thing that we can know about existence is that we are in it because we can ask about the nature of existence. That proves that something is doing the asking. Now, our deepest nature, what we can know about ourselves, totally separate problems. But we know that we exist because we can question our own existence. Nice. That brings us to the end of the lecture portion for today. I do have a little thought assignment for you. Using only the cogito, only this idea that we're aware of our own existence, is there any other knowledge that you could deduce? Is there anything that you can say that, well, since I exist, I also know that X, Y, or Z? I don't expect you to have ironclad answers. This is one of those times where I'm far more interested in the questions than I am in the answers. But I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about what it means that all of our knowledge is built upon a sort of mutual understanding that all of it might, in fact, not exist. That it could just be you and your cold, mechanical brain electrically stimulated in your pickle jar. Well, that's comforting. I think we're going to wrap it up there. I would like to thank you for your work today. If there's any time left during this lesson, you can discuss among yourselves what we've learned today, or you can use this time to work on your This I Believe essay. I did have a email from, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I want to say Jenny. I did have an email from Jenny asking if the This I Believe will be turned in a hard copy or soft copy. These will probably be turned in electronically. I'm still waiting to get some issues resolved in terms of getting materials in and submitted and whatnot. Don't sweat it for right now. Continue to work on your drafts in whatever format is most acceptable. They will probably be turned in electronically in some format. I thank you very much, and I hope you have an excellent day.